The flight attendant's smirk vanished when CEO Lamar Washington stepped onto the plane, heading straight for his sobbing daughter. "Daddy," she said, "people like me don't belong in first class." The entire cabin froze as Lamar's voice thundered, "This airline, my airline, has a serious problem. Before we dive into this shocking story about privilege, prejudice, and power, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city in the comments below and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more incredible true stories of justice served. What would you do if someone underestimated your child like this? Let's find out how this situation unfolded. 15-year-old Jasmine Washington couldn't contain her excitement as she zipped her designer suitcase closed. After months of begging, her father had finally agreed to let her fly solo to visit her aunt in New York City. This wasn't just any trip, it represented freedom, independence, and her parents' growing trust in her maturity. "Dad, I've checked everything 3 times. I have my ID, my ticket, and emergency contacts," Jasmine said, scrolling through her pre-flight checklist on her phone. "You promised you wouldn't worry." Lamar Washington stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, his tall frame casting a long shadow across her plush carpet. Despite being the owner and CEO of Liberty Airlines, one of the fastest-growing carriers in the country, Lamar's most challenging job had always been parenting. "I know, baby girl. It's just hard to let go sometimes," he admitted, checking his watch. "I've got that emergency board meeting this morning, but I'll be on the next flight out. Just a few hours behind you." What Jasmine didn't know was that Lamar had arranged for Raymond Jones, his most trusted security consultant, to keep a discreet eye on her throughout the journey. It wasn't that he didn't trust his daughter, it was everyone else he worried about. Lamar's journey to becoming the owner of Liberty Airlines was anything but straightforward. Growing up in South Atlanta, he'd watched his single mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Through scholarships and night shifts at a local gas station, he'd put himself through college, eventually starting a small ground transportation company with a single van. 25 years later, that one van had transformed into an empire, culminating in his acquisition of Liberty Airlines just 6 months ago. "Lamar, did you double-check her ticket?" Kendra Washington called from downstairs. As one of Atlanta's top neurosurgeons, Kendra approached parenthood with the same meticulous attention she gave her patients. "And did you remind her to text us when she gets through security?" "Yes, dear," Lamar replied, sharing a conspiratorial smile with Jasmine. His wife's protective nature had only intensified since their son Andre left for college last year, leaving Jasmine as the sole focus of her maternal concerns. Jasmine checked her phone, scrolling through messages from friends who couldn't believe her parents were actually letting her fly alone. At 15, most of her classmates were still being chaperoned everywhere. But Jasmine had always been mature for her age, a quality inherited from both her high-achieving parents. "First class all the way," Lamar said proudly, helping her with the suitcase. "Nothing but the best for my princess." "Dad, you didn't have to do that," Jasmine protested weakly, though her eyes sparkled at the thought of the premium cabin. Despite growing up with wealth, Jasmine had been raised to value money and privilege, not take it for granted. "Consider it a test run," Lamar winked. "If you handle this trip well, maybe we'll talk about that summer program in Paris next year." As they loaded her luggage into the waiting town car, Lamar felt that familiar pang of worry. He'd fought hard to give his children opportunities he'd never had, but he couldn't protect them from everything, especially the subtle and not-so-subtle racism that persisted even in their privileged circles. "Remember what I always tell you," he said, giving her a final hug. Jasmine nodded, completing their familiar mantra, "Hold your head high, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small." The town car pulled away, and Jasmine felt a rush of excitement and nervousness. This was it, her first real taste of independence. What she didn't know was that this routine flight would become anything but ordinary. At his office, Lamar's phone buzzed with a text from Raymond confirming he had Jasmine in his sights at the airport drop-off. Satisfied that his security measures were in place, Lamar turned his attention to the urgent board meeting. The latest acquisition had hit some regulatory snags, and he needed to address the shareholders' concerns before catching his own flight to New York. Little did he know that in just a few hours, he would be boarding that plane under very different circumstances than he'd planned. Atlanta International Airport hummed with the usual cacophony of announcements, rolling suitcases, and hurried conversations as Jasmine made her way through the main terminal. 2 hours early, just as her father had insisted. She'd rolled her eyes at his excessive caution, but now appreciated the buffer time as she navigated the sprawling airport. At the security checkpoint, Jasmine presented her ID and boarding pass to a stern-faced TSA agent who looked from the documents to her face with thinly veiled suspicion. "This is a first-class ticket," the agent stated flatly. "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied politely, maintaining eye contact the way her father had taught her. "How old are you?" 15, sir." The agent scrutinized her ID again before reluctantly waving her through, but not before signaling to his colleague to give her carry-on bag an extra thorough inspection. Jasmine noticed but said nothing, maintaining the dignified silence her parents had instilled in her when facing such treatment. From a discreet distance, Raymond Jones observed the interaction, making a mental note to include it in his report to Lamar. A former military intelligence officer, Raymond had worked for the Washington family for 7 years and had witnessed countless similar incidents despite the family's wealth and status. After clearing security, Jasmine headed toward the first-class lounge, her rolling suitcase trailing behind her. The exclusive space was designed to cocoon premium passengers in luxury before their flights, a stark contrast to the crowded general terminal. As she approached the entrance, Bethany Caldwell, the head flight attendant for Liberty Airlines with 15 years of service, was just exiting after her pre-flight briefing. Bethany's once ambitious dreams had calcified into resentment over the years. Divorced 3 years ago and struggling with mounting debt, she'd grown increasingly bitter about the wealthy passengers she served daily while barely making ends meet herself. "Excuse me," Bethany said sharply as Jasmine presented her boarding pass to the lounge attendant. "I think you might be confused about where you're supposed to be." The lounge attendant hesitated, looking between Jasmine and Bethany with uncertainty. "I'm not confused," Jasmine replied evenly. "I have a first-class ticket to New York." Bethany's eyes narrowed as she scanned the boarding pass. "And how exactly did you get this ticket?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. Several nearby passengers looked up from their devices, some with discomfort, others with barely concealed interest in the unfolding scene. "My father purchased it for me," Jasmine answered, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. "Right," Bethany said with a skeptical smirk. "Well, make sure you're at the right gate. First-class passengers board first, through the priority lane." With that thinly veiled warning, Bethany strode away, her wheeled crew bag clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. The lounge attendant gave Jasmine an apologetic smile and gestured her inside, but the damage was done. Jasmine felt eyes following her as she found a quiet corner seat. "Would you like something to drink, Miss Washington?" a lounge server asked, deliberately using her name with a warm smile, a small act of kindness that helped restore some of Jasmine's confidence. Raymond, seated across the lounge with a newspaper, discreetly typed a message to Lamar, "Minor incident at lounge entrance. Jay handling it with grace. Flight attendant showed prejudice. Will monitor situation." Lamar, in the middle of his board meeting, felt his phone vibrate but couldn't check it immediately. The acquisition discussion had become heated, with several board members questioning the regulatory compliance of their newest regional routes. Back in the lounge, Jasmine observed Bethany speaking with other crew members, occasionally glancing in her direction. She tried to focus on her book, but the words blurred as she remembered similar experiences. The raised eyebrows when she entered exclusive boutiques with her mother, the security guards who followed her in department stores, the teachers who seemed surprised by her academic achievements. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "Their prejudice is their weakness, not yours." But knowing this intellectually didn't stop the sting of being prejudged, of having to constantly prove she belonged in spaces others entered without question. As boarding time approached, Jasmine gathered her belongings, straightened her shoulders, and headed toward the gate. Raymond followed at a distance, watching as Bethany assumed her position at the boarding door, greeting first-class passengers with a practiced smile that noticeably cooled when Jasmine approached. The confrontation that was about to unfold would prove to be far more consequential than either of them could have anticipated. First-class passengers may now board through the priority lane, announced the gate agent, her voice echoing through the crowded boarding area. Jasmine took a deep breath and joined the small line of premium passengers. She noticed how Bethany's smile warmed as she greeted an older white couple, laughing at something the husband said while checking their boarding passes with casual ease. When Jasmine reached the front of the line, Bethany's demeanor transformed instantly. The flight attendant's eyes narrowed as she examined Jasmine's boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny. "This is first-class boarding," Bethany stated loudly, making no effort to lower her voice. "I think you're in the wrong line." "No, I have a first-class ticket," Jasmine replied, pointing to the clearly marked cabin class on her boarding pass. Bethany held the pass up to the light as if checking for a watermark. "This doesn't look right. Where did you get this?" By now, several passengers had stopped to watch the interaction. Jasmine felt heat rising to her face but maintained her composure, just as her parents had taught her. "My father purchased it for me. It's a valid ticket." Her voice remained steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "And your father is?" Bethany's tone suggested she didn't believe Jasmine could possibly belong in the premium cabin. "Lamar Washington," Jasmine answered, hoping the name might trigger some recognition. Bethany snorted. "Right. And I'm Beyoncé." "Look, honey, if you found this ticket or someone gave it to you as a joke, I need you to step aside and let me help the actual first-class passengers board." A middle-aged white businessman behind Jasmine cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Excuse me, but if her boarding pass scans correctly, what's the problem?" "Sir, I'm just doing my job," Bethany replied tersely. "There seem to be irregularities with this boarding pass." "What irregularities?" Jasmine asked, her voice finally betraying a tremor of emotion. "The ticket is legitimate." "I'm going to need to see some ID," Bethany demanded, holding out her hand expectantly. Jasmine produced her student ID and passport, which Bethany examined with theatrical suspicion. By now, a small crowd had gathered, and the boarding process had stalled. "Is there a problem here?" A deep voice cut through the tension as Michael Jenkins, another flight attendant, approached the gate. Michael, a black man in his early 30s, had noticed the commotion from where he was helping an elderly passenger with her carry-on. "This young lady is trying to board in first class with what appears to be an irregular ticket," Bethany explained, emphasizing "young lady" with barely concealed disdain. Michael frowned and glanced at the boarding pass. "Have you scanned it?" "That's not the point," Bethany began, but Michael had already taken the pass and run it through the scanner. The system beeped its approval, displaying Jasmine's assigned seat in first class. "The ticket is valid," Michael stated flatly. "Seat 2A." Bethany's lips thinned to a hard line. "Fine, but I want to check the manifest." She turned to Jasmine with a cold smile. "You can board, but if there's any discrepancy, you'll be removed from the aircraft." Jasmine walked down the jetway, feeling dozens of eyes on her back. Inside the plane, she found her window seat and tried to settle in, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fasten her seatbelt. "Are you okay?" asked an elderly white woman in the aisle seat, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. Before Jasmine could answer, Bethany appeared at her side. "Excuse me, I need to see your boarding pass again." "You just checked it at the gate," Jasmine protested, tears threatening to spill despite her best efforts. "Airline policy. I need to verify all first-class passengers," Bethany insisted, though she hadn't asked to see anyone else's pass a second time. The elderly woman frowned. "Young lady, I've been flying first class for 40 years, and that is not standard procedure." Bethany ignored her, snatching Jasmine's pass when she reluctantly held it out. Washington, like the city? Or the state? Her tone made it clear she was mocking the name. Like my father, Jasmine replied, finally reaching for her phone. Who I'm calling right now? Go ahead, Bethany smirked. Call whoever gave you this ticket. Meanwhile, I'm going to check if there's been some kind of mistake with our affirmative action program. Sometimes these diversity initiatives get a little overenthusiastic. A collective gasp rose from nearby passengers who overheard the comment. Michael, who had been helping stow luggage nearby, froze in disbelief. That's enough, he said firmly, stepping forward. Bethany, I need to speak with you in the galley. Now. As they moved away, Jasmine's phone connected to her father. Through tears, she explained what was happening. On the other end of the line, Lamar Washington's expression darkened with each word. The board members around him fell silent as they watched their normally composed CEO transform before their eyes. Stay where you are, princess, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm coming. Back on the plane, Bethany and Michael were engaged in a heated whispered argument in the galley. You can't treat passengers like that, Michael hissed. Especially not children. I'm protecting the integrity of our premium service, Bethany insisted. You know as well as I do that ticket has to be fraudulent. She doesn't belong there. The only fraud I see is your claim to professionalism, Michael retorted. I'm reporting this to the captain. As he stormed off toward the cockpit, Bethany returned to the cabin, her smile brittle as she continued preparing for departure. The atmosphere in first class had grown tense, with several passengers openly glaring at Bethany while others awkwardly avoided eye contact with Jasmine. The confrontation had set the stage for what would become one of the most dramatic flights in Liberty Airlines history, and no one, least of all Bethany Caldwell, could have predicted how it would end. The aircraft doors closed with a heavy thud as the final passengers settled into their seats. Jasmine sat quietly by the window, trying to make herself as small as possible. The excitement of her first solo trip had evaporated, replaced by the familiar, crushing weight of being seen as an intruder in spaces others entered freely. As the flight attendants began their pre-departure service, offering hot towels and beverage options to first-class passengers, Bethany methodically worked her way through the cabin, until she reached Jasmine's row. Without a word, she skipped over the teenager and continued to the next passenger. Excuse me, called the elderly woman seated beside Jasmine. You missed us. Bethany turned with a practiced smile. I'm so sorry, ma'am. What can I get for you? I'd like a ginger ale, the woman replied, then pointedly added, and I believe the young lady would like something as well. Bethany's smile tightened. Of course. And for her. She didn't look at Jasmine as she asked. Orange juice, please, Jasmine said softly. We seem to be out of orange juice in this section, Bethany replied immediately. We have apple or cranberry. From across the aisle, a man in an expensive suit narrowed his eyes. Harold Preston, CEO of Preston Ventures, had been observing the situation with growing discomfort. When he'd first noticed the name Washington on Jasmine's boarding pass during the earlier confrontation, something had clicked in his mind. Now, watching the continued mistreatment, he was almost certain. That's odd, Harold interjected. I just heard you offer orange juice to the gentleman in 1C. Bethany flushed. I'll check again, she said tersely, before moving back to the galley. Harold leaned across the aisle. I'm Harold Preston, he introduced himself to Jasmine. And I believe I may have had the pleasure of meeting your father at last year's Transportation Innovation Summit. Jasmine nodded cautiously. Yes, my dad speaks at that conference every year. Harold had turned down an opportunity to invest in Lamar Washington's first business venture 15 years ago, a decision he'd come to regret as he watched Washington's empire grow. The realization of who this teenager was sent a chill down his spine. If she was who he thought she was, Bethany's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was career suicide. Michael appeared with Jasmine's orange juice. "I apologize for the wait," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "And for any inconvenience during boarding." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, gratitude evident in her voice. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Dorothy Wilson, the elderly woman beside Jasmine, introduced herself properly. "I'm Dorothy. I taught history for 40 years before retiring. Where are you headed in New York?" The simple kindness of normal conversation brought tears to Jasmine's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "I'm visiting my aunt. She's a curator at the Metropolitan Museum." "The Met. How wonderful," Dorothy exclaimed. "You know, I marched with Dr. King in Selma. Seeing what just happened to you." She shook her head sadly. "Some things change too slowly. Have you ever been in a situation where you were discriminated against just because of how you look?" Comment number 1 if you've experienced prejudice like Jasmine, or comment number 2 if you've witnessed someone else being treated unfairly. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of justice and resilience. As the flight reached cruising altitude, the cabin service began in earnest. The first-class meal was served with china plates and real silverware, to everyone except Jasmine, who received her food in the plastic containers typically used in economy. "There must be some mistake," Dorothy said when Bethany placed the tray before Jasmine. "We had an odd number of premium meal services today," Bethany explained smoothly. "We prioritized our frequent flyers." Michael, working the other aisle, noticed the discrepancy immediately. In the galley, he confronted Bethany again. "What are you doing? This is beyond unprofessional." "Mind your own section," Bethany snapped. "I've been with this airline for 15 years. I know what I'm doing." 15 years of what? Building up complaints? Michael shot back. "I worked for Washington Transportation before joining Liberty Airlines. Do you even know who that girl is?" Bethany rolled her eyes. "Another entitled teenager whose parents spoil her rotten." Michael shook his head in disbelief but said nothing more. He didn't reveal Jasmine's connection to their ultimate boss, partly out of professional discretion and partly because he wanted to see how far Bethany would take her prejudice without knowing the potential consequences. Back in the cabin, Harold Preston continued making polite conversation with Jasmine, increasingly impressed by her poise and intelligence. He was also increasingly concerned about the possible fallout from this situation. As a venture capitalist, he recognized the potential partnership opportunities with Washington enterprises that might now be jeopardized by his mere proximity to this discriminatory treatment. When turbulence hit midway through the flight, Bethany rushed to check on the passengers, the white passengers, offering to secure their drinks and electronic devices. She bypassed Jasmine entirely, allowing the teenager's water to spill across her tray. "Here, dear," Dorothy handed Jasmine her napkin, then fixed Bethany with a stern glare. "Young woman, I have lived through segregation and Jim Crow. I never expected to see this kind of behavior on a flight in 2025. Bethany flushed. "I'm simply attending to passengers who need assistance." "Then why did you skip over us?" Dorothy demanded. Other passengers had begun to notice the pattern. Some were filming discreetly on their phones. A woman across the aisle shook her head in disapproval. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable. In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Bailey received a message from ground control. He frowned at the content, then turned to his co-pilot. "We're being instructed to make an unscheduled stop in Charlotte." "Mechanical issue?" the co-pilot asked. "No," Bailey replied, scanning the message again. "Apparently, we have a VIP boarding. Direct orders from Liberty Airlines executive management." What Bailey didn't know was that Lamar Washington had deployed every resource at his disposal to intercept the flight carrying his daughter. After hearing Jasmine's tearful account, he had left his board meeting without explanation, instructed his pilot to ready his private jet, then realized it would be faster to divert Jasmine's commercial flight to the nearest airport where he could board. As the captain announced the unexpected stop, confused murmurs spread through the cabin. Bethany seemed particularly agitated by the disruption to her service routine. "This is your fault," she whispered venomously as she passed Jasmine's seat. "Complaining to Daddy?" The comment, intended only for Jasmine's ears, was overheard by Harold Preston, who had been leaning over to retrieve his fallen napkin. His expression hardened. Whatever professional restraint he'd been exercising vanished in that moment. He raised his hand to summon Michael. "I'd like to submit a formal complaint about this flight attendant," he stated loudly. "And I want it on record before we land." But landing would bring more than just an official complaint. As the plane began its descent into Charlotte, none of the passengers, and certainly not Bethany Caldwell, could have anticipated who would be waiting to board. Would you stand up for someone being discriminated against, or would you stay silent to avoid conflict? This story is about to take an unexpected turn that will change everyone's lives forever. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding as the plane began its descent toward Charlotte. Jasmine stared out the window, a mixture of humiliation and relief washing over her. Her father was coming. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. In the galley, Michael Jenkins was having a hushed but intense conversation with his colleague, flight attendant Julia Roberts. "I've never seen anything like it," Michael explained, keeping his voice low. "She's targeting this kid relentlessly, and for what? Because she's black in first class?" Julia glanced toward the cabin. Bethany's had issues before. There was that complaint last month from the Brazilian family, and before that, the incident with the Indian businessman. Those got swept under the rug, Michael pointed out. This won't. Why? What's different this time? Michael hesitated. Let's just say I recognize the passenger's name. If it's who I think it is, there will be serious consequences. Before Julia could press for details, Bethany bustled into the galley, her face flushed with irritation. This stop is completely throwing off our service schedule. Who's so important that we're diverting to Charlotte, anyway? Neither Michael nor Julia answered, exchanging glances that Bethany missed entirely as she aggressively reorganized the beverage cart. In the first-class cabin, the meal service had concluded. Jasmine had barely touched her food, her appetite destroyed by the ongoing tension. She jumped slightly when Harold Preston addressed her again from across the aisle. "Ms. Washington, if you don't mind my asking, what does your father do exactly? I believe we met briefly at the Transportation Summit, but I'd love to refresh my memory." The question was deliberately loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Harold had spent the last hour connecting the dots and was now certain of Jasmine's identity. Lamar Washington wasn't just any successful businessman, he was the new owner of Liberty Airlines. The same airline where Bethany Caldwell was currently demonstrating the most appalling customer service he'd ever witnessed. Jasmine hesitated, then answered simply, "He owns a transportation company." Dorothy Wilson patted Jasmine's hand encouragingly. "Your father sounds like a remarkable man. Building a successful business is no small feat, especially for a black entrepreneur. In my day, the barriers were even higher." "They're still pretty high," Jasmine admitted quietly. "My dad says he has to be twice as good to get half the credit." Dorothy nodded knowingly. "That's why education was my battlefield. Taught black history before it was even allowed in the curriculum. Got in plenty of trouble for it too." She leaned closer to Jasmine. "But let me tell you something about trouble, young lady. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's the only way things change." Harold Preston, overhearing this exchange, discreetly began tapping on his tablet. As one of the country's most prominent venture capitalists, he had resources at his fingertips. Within minutes, he had confirmed what he suspected. Lamar Washington, former CEO of Washington Transportation Group, had acquired Liberty Airlines 6 months ago in a move that had sent shockwaves through the industry. And now, if his instincts were correct, Washington was about to board this very flight. Bethany emerged from the galley with the duty-free cart, starting her sales pitch to the first-class passengers. When she reached Jasmine's row, she addressed only Dorothy. "Would you like to see our duty-free catalog, ma'am?" "Yes, I would," Dorothy replied, taking the glossy booklet. "And I'm sure my young friend here would too." Bethany's smile remained fixed as she deliberately avoided looking at Jasmine. "I only have one catalog left. Perhaps you can share." As she moved to the next row, Harold caught Bethany's attention. "Excuse me, flight attendant. I believe you dropped this." He held up his phone, screen facing her, displaying a news article with the headline. "Transportation mogul Lamar Washington acquires Liberty Airlines." Bethany glanced at it, confusion crossing her features. "I didn't drop anything, sir." "Oh, but you did," Harold replied meaningfully. "You dropped any chance of keeping your job once this flight lands." Color drained from Bethany's face as she stared at the screen, then at Jasmine, then back at Harold. "I don't understand." "You will," Harold assured her, tucking his phone away as the captain announced their final approach to Charlotte. Meanwhile, in the Charlotte Airport terminal, Lamar Washington strode purposefully toward the gate, flanked by two Liberty Airlines executives who had been summoned on short notice and were still trying to piece together what was happening. Behind them walked Patricia Chen, the airline's chief legal counsel, her expression grave as she listened to Lamar's account of the situation. "Let me get this straight," Patricia said, her precise, measured tone a counterpoint to Lamar's barely contained fury. "A Liberty Airlines flight attendant has been racially discriminating against your daughter throughout this flight." "That's correct," Lamar confirmed. "And I want her terminated the moment we land in New York." "Mr. Washington, with all due respect, we have procedures for investigating these incidents," one of the executives began. Lamar stopped walking, causing the entire group to halt abruptly. "Let me be perfectly clear. I didn't buy this airline to have my child humiliated by its staff. I'm not boarding as the owner today, I'm boarding as a father. But make no mistake, by the time we reach New York, I'll be both." As the plane touched down in Charlotte, Jasmine's phone lit up with a text from her father, "I'm here. Stay in your seat." The passengers, still confused about the unscheduled stop, murmured among themselves as the jet bridge connected to the aircraft. Captain Bailey's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the unexpected stop. We'll be boarding a few additional passengers and then continuing to New York. Our ground time should be approximately 20 minutes. In the galley, Michael was summoned by the captain via intercom. When he entered the cockpit, Bailey handed him a message from operations. "What's going on, Jenkins? Why is the owner of the airline boarding our flight in Charlotte?" Michael's suspicions were confirmed. "Sir, I believe it has to do with a situation in first class. Ms. Caldwell has been unprofessional with a young passenger who appears to be Mr. Washington's daughter." Bailey's face darkened. "Define unprofessional." "Discriminatory, sir. Racially discriminatory." The captain closed his eyes briefly. "Get back to your station. Say nothing to Caldwell." As Michael exited the cockpit, the main cabin door reopened. A hushed silence fell over the first-class cabin as Lamar Washington stepped onto the plane, his imposing 6'3" frame filling the entryway. Behind him came the two executives and the legal counsel, their expressions serious. Bethany, stationed at the door as required for boarding, offered her standard greeting. "Welcome aboard Liberty Airlines. May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Lamar handed her his premium ticket without a word, his eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on Jasmine. The relief on his daughter's face was immediately replaced by fresh tears. "Daddy," she called out, her voice small and vulnerable in a way Lamar hadn't heard since she was much younger. As he moved toward her, Bethany reached out automatically. "Sir, please wait until all boarding passengers are seated before," her words died in her throat as Lamar fixed her with a look of such intensity that she physically stepped back. "Are you Bethany Caldwell?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Bethany nodded, her customer service smile faltering. "Yes, sir." "How did you, the flight attendant who's been making my daughter feel unwelcome in first class?" The color drained from Bethany's face as realization dawned. Her eyes darted from Lamar to Jasmine and back again, connecting the shared surname for the first time. There must be some misunderstanding. I've been providing standard service to all. We'll discuss your standard service shortly." Lamar cut her off, continuing to his daughter's side. As father and daughter embraced, the tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Dorothy Wilson nodded approvingly while Harold Preston observed with the calculating gaze of a businessman recognizing a potential watershed moment. The truth was undeniable now. The flight attendant who had spent the past 2 hours discriminating against a black teenager in first class was now face to face with that teenager's father, the owner of the entire airline. What would happen next would change not just Bethany Caldwell's career trajectory, but the culture of Liberty Airlines itself. Charlotte Douglas International Airport bustled with activity as Liberty Airlines Flight 372 sat at its temporary gate. Inside the first-class cabin, time seemed suspended in a moment of reckoning. Lamar Washington held his daughter close, his tailored suit jacket absorbing her quiet tears. The other passengers watched in a mixture of discomfort and fascination, pieces of the puzzle falling into place as they witnessed the powerful black man comfort the teenager who had been mistreated before their eyes. "It's okay, princess," Lamar murmured. "I'm here now." Jasmine pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I tried to handle it like you taught me, Dad. I really did." "You did nothing wrong," he assured her, his voice carrying enough for nearby passengers to hear. "The problem isn't your behavior. It never was." In the galley, Bethany Caldwell was having a panic attack. Her hands trembled as she clutched the counter for support, the reality of her situation crashing down like a collapsing building. "He owns the airline," she whispered to Michael, who was organizing drink supplies with deliberate focus. "Lamar Washington is the owner of Liberty?" "Acquired it 6 months ago," Michael confirmed without looking at her. It was in all the industry newsletters. There was even a company-wide email. Bethany's mind raced through the potential consequences. 15 years of service, her seniority, her pension, all potentially gone because she'd made assumptions about a teenage girl in first class. It wasn't about race, she insisted desperately. It was about protocol. Unaccompanied minors in first class are unusual. Save it, Michael cut her off. "I watched you skip her during beverage service. I saw you give her economy meals on a first-class ticket. I heard your comments about affirmative action tickets. Just stop." Outside on the jet bridge, Patricia Chen was speaking with Julia Roberts, who had been summoned from the aircraft. The chief legal counsel's expression remained neutral as she took notes on her tablet. "So you observed Ms. Caldwell treating the Washington girl differently from other passengers?" Patricia clarified. Julia hesitated, torn between professional loyalty and the truth. "Yes," she finally admitted. "It was noticeable." "And has Ms. Caldwell exhibited similar behavior on other flights?" "There have been incidents. Nothing officially reported, but yes, patterns with certain passengers." Patricia nodded, making another note. "Thank you for your candor. You may return to the aircraft." Inside the plane, social media was already buzzing. Several passengers had been discreetly recording Bethany's behavior toward Jasmine, and now footage of Lamar Washington's boarding was being uploaded despite the spotty in-flight Wi-Fi. The hashtag Liberty Airlines racism was trending, with commenters demanding action from the company. In Atlanta, the Liberty Airlines public relations team was in crisis mode, frantically monitoring the situation and preparing statements. The company had been working to rebrand itself as more inclusive since Washington's acquisition. This incident threatened to undo months of careful image cultivation. Captain Bailey's voice crackled over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be resuming our journey to New York shortly. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure. Bethany took a deep breath and straightened her uniform, summoning every ounce of professionalism she could muster. She had no choice but to continue her duties until they landed. As she emerged from the galley, she found Patricia Chen waiting for her. Ms. Caldwell, I'm Patricia Chen, Chief Legal Counsel for Liberty Airlines. Your supervisor, Julia Roberts, will be taking over your duties for the remainder of this flight. Please take a seat in the jump seat until we reach New York. Am I being suspended? Bethany asked, her voice barely audible. Consider yourself relieved of duty pending investigation, Patricia replied evenly. We'll discuss next steps after landing. Bethany's face crumpled, but she nodded and moved toward the rear jump seat. As she passed through first class, she couldn't bring herself to look at Jasmine or Lamar Washington. Dorothy Wilson, however, had no such reservations. The elderly woman fixed Bethany with a penetrating stare. Young woman, she called out, her voice clear and carrying, I hope you use this as a learning experience. I've seen too many lives diminished by prejudice, including those who hold it. Jasmine, composed now, squeezed Dorothy's hand in gratitude. Harold Preston seized the opportunity to approach Lamar Washington, who had taken the previously empty seat beside his daughter. Mr. Washington, Harold Preston of Preston Ventures. He extended his hand. We met briefly at last year's transportation summit. I must say, your daughter has conducted herself with remarkable dignity today. Lamar shook the offered hand, recognition dawning. Preston, the venture firm that passed on my series of funding round 15 years ago. Harold had the grace to look chagrined. One of my many regrettable decisions. I've followed your career with great admiration since then. And now you've witnessed firsthand why diversity in transportation matters to me, Lamar replied, his arms still protectively around Jasmine's shoulders. As the plane pushed back from the gate to resume its journey to New York, the atmosphere in first class had transformed. Passengers who had remained silent during Jasmine's ordeal now attempted to engage her in conversation, their sudden friendliness transparent in its timing. Michael Jenkins, now working alongside Julia to complete the interrupted service, stopped beside Lamar's seat. Mr. Washington, I don't know if you remember me. I worked for your ground transportation division 3 years ago before joining Liberty Airlines. Lamar studied him for a moment, then nodded. Michael Jenkins. You helped develop our accessibility protocols for passengers with disabilities. Yes, sir, Michael confirmed, surprised and touched that Washington remembered him. I wanted to apologize for not doing more to stop what happened today. You did what you could within the system, Lamar acknowledged. And you'll be part of changing that system. In the rear jump seat, Bethany sat isolated and numb. Her phone buzzed with a text from her teenage son asking when she'd be home. The simple message brought fresh tears to her eyes as she confronted the possibility that her actions today might have destroyed her ability to provide for him. 15 years of harboring prejudices she wouldn't even admit to herself had culminated in this moment, discriminating against the daughter of the one man who could end her career with a single word. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the plane reached cruising altitude once more, Patricia Chen sat down beside Lamar Washington with her tablet. We've collected preliminary statements from crew members and several passengers, she reported. The evidence of discriminatory treatment is substantial. And how would this normally be handled? Lamar asked, though he already knew the answer. Patricia's expression remained professional. Typically, there would be a formal investigation, potentially resulting in disciplinary action ranging from sensitivity training to termination, depending on severity and prior incidents. And how many similar complaints have been filed against Ms. Caldwell previously? Patricia hesitated. 3 in the past 2 years. None resulted in formal disciplinary action due to insufficient evidence. You mean the word of minority passengers wasn't deemed credible enough, Lamar translated flatly. That was before your acquisition, Patricia noted carefully. The previous management had different priorities. Lamar nodded thoughtfully, looking at his daughter who had finally fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from the emotional ordeal. When we land in New York, I want to address the entire cabin. This goes beyond one flight attendant's behavior. This is about changing a culture. As the plane continued its journey toward New York, no one could have predicted how this seemingly routine flight would ultimately transform not just Liberty Airlines, but spark a broader conversation about the subtle and not-so-subtle racism that persisted in American corporations in 2025. The seatbelt sign dinged off as Flight 372 reached its cruising altitude for the final leg to New York. Lamar Washington gently adjusted his position to avoid waking Jasmine, who had finally drifted into an exhausted sleep against his shoulder. The emotional toll of the day was evident in the dried tear tracks on her cheeks. In the aisle beside them, Julia Roberts had taken over Bethany's duties, providing attentive service to all first-class passengers with pointed professionalism. The contrast between her approach and Bethany's earlier behavior was stark. Michael Jenkins emerged from the galley with a fresh pot of coffee. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Washington?" he asked quietly. "Yes, thank you, Michael," Lamar replied, accepting the cup with his free hand. "And I'd like to speak with you privately when you have a moment." "Of course, sir." As Michael moved on to the next passenger, Dorothy Wilson leaned over from her seat. "Your daughter is a remarkable young woman, Mr. Washington. She handled herself with more grace than most adults would have managed." Lamar nodded, pride momentarily displacing his anger. "She shouldn't have had to, Ms. Wilson. No child should have to develop the skill of gracefully enduring racism. Call me Dorothy, please." "And you're absolutely right." The elderly woman's eyes held the wisdom of someone who had witnessed decades of American racial history firsthand. "In my day, we fought so that this generation wouldn't face the same battles. Yet here we are." From across the aisle, Harold Preston had been listening intently. "Mr. Washington, if I may," he interjected, "I believe this incident presents not just a challenge but an opportunity for Liberty Airlines." Lamar raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Transportation has historically been a flashpoint for civil rights in America. From segregated buses to discriminatory treatment at airports, Harold explained. As the first major airline with black ownership, Liberty could set new industry standards for inclusive service. Before Lamar could respond, Patricia Chen appeared beside their seats. "Mr. Washington, we've compiled the preliminary statements from passengers and crew. Would you like to review them now?" "In a moment," Lamar replied. He gently woke Jasmine, whose eyes fluttered open with momentary confusion before the reality of their situation returned. "Princess, I need to talk to Ms. Chen. Will you be okay for a few minutes?" Jasmine nodded, straightening in her seat. "I'm fine, Dad." Lamar moved to an empty row with Patricia, who handed him her tablet. As he scrolled through the statements, his expression darkened. The documented pattern of behavior was worse than he'd initially understood. Bethany had systematically singled Jasmine out from the moment she arrived at the airport. "These witness accounts are damning," Lamar noted. "Especially coming from fellow passengers with no connection to Jasmine." Patricia nodded. "Particularly Mr. Preston's statement. As a high-tier frequent flyer, his word carries significant weight in these matters." "And what about previous complaints against Ms. Caldwell?" Patricia swiped to another document. 3 formal complaints in the past 2 years, all from passengers of color, all dismissed due to insufficient evidence or classified as misunderstandings by previous management. Lamar's jaw tightened. "That ends today." Meanwhile, in the rear jump seat, Bethany sat alone with her thoughts, her mind replaying the day's events with growing horror. How had she not recognized the Washington name? It had been all over the company newsletters when the acquisition happened. She had even attended a mandatory staff meeting about the new ownership. The truth was uncomfortable. She had never imagined that the new black owner of Liberty Airlines would be connected to the black teenager she had deemed out of place in first class. Her assumptions had been so deeply ingrained that she hadn't even questioned them. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her supervisor. Bethany stared at the screen, knowing that answering would only confirm what she already feared. Her career was over. Back in first class, Michael Jenkins found a moment to speak privately with Lamar in the galley. "Mr. Washington, I want to apologize again for not doing more to intervene earlier." Lamar studied the younger man. "You tried to mitigate the situation within the constraints of your position. That took courage." "Not enough," Michael admitted. "I recognized your name on the manifest right away. I actually applied to your management training program last year but wasn't selected." "I remember your application," Lamar surprised him by saying. "Your ideas about accessible transportation services were innovative. We need that kind of thinking at Liberty." Michael blinked in surprise. "You personally reviewed my application?" "I review all final candidates for the leadership pipeline," Lamar confirmed. "It's how I built my ground transportation business from nothing. By personally selecting people with potential." Before Michael could respond, Captain Bailey's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be beginning our initial descent into New York in approximately 15 minutes. At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Lamar Washington to address the cabin." A murmur of interest rippled through the aircraft as Lamar made his way to the front of the first-class section. Passengers in economy craned their necks, curious about the unusual announcement. Lamar took the cabin phone, his tall frame commanding attention as he spoke. "Good afternoon. My name is Lamar Washington, and I'm the owner and CEO of Liberty Airlines." The cabin fell completely silent. "Today, my 15-year-old daughter Jasmine was subjected to discriminatory treatment on this flight based solely on the color of her skin. I boarded in Charlotte not as a CEO, but as a father concerned for his child." He paused, scanning the faces watching him intently. "What happened today is unacceptable, but sadly not unusual. Many of you witnessed it. Some spoke up. Others remained silent. I don't blame those who didn't intervene. Speaking truth to power is always difficult." Dorothy Wilson nodded approvingly from her seat. Liberty Airlines was founded on the principle that travel should be accessible to all. When I acquired this company 6 months ago, I committed to building an airline where every passenger is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or economic status. Lamar's gaze swept the cabin again, his voice gaining strength. "Today we fell short of that commitment. For that, on behalf of Liberty Airlines, I sincerely apologize to my daughter and to anyone else who has experienced similar treatment on our flights." In the rear jump seat, Bethany felt tears welling up as the magnitude of her actions truly hit her. "But an apology without action is just words," Lamar continued. "So today, I am announcing the creation of a new passenger dignity initiative at Liberty Airlines. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. We will establish clear protocols for reporting and addressing discriminatory behavior. And we will hold ourselves accountable through transparent metrics and independent oversight." Scattered applause broke out, growing stronger as Lamar continued. "This is not just about one incident or one employee. This is about creating systemic change in an industry that has historically struggled with these issues. As perhaps the only major airline with black ownership, Liberty has both an opportunity and a responsibility to lead by example." The applause grew louder, with several passengers rising to their feet. "Thank you for your attention. We'll be landing shortly in New York, where representatives will be available to collect additional statements from any passengers who witnessed today's events. Thank you." As Lamar returned the phone to its cradle, the cabin erupted in applause. Harold Preston stood, shaking Lamar's hand with new respect in his eyes. Dorothy Wilson dabbed at tears, nodding in approval. Even passengers who had remained silent during Jasmine's ordeal seemed moved by Lamar's words. Michael approached Lamar as he returned to his seat. "Sir, the captain would like to speak with you before we land." Lamar nodded, squeezing Jasmine's shoulder reassuringly before following Michael to the cockpit. Inside, Captain Bailey stood from his seat. "Mr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for what happened on my aircraft today. The captain is ultimately responsible for everything that occurs on a flight." "I appreciate that, Captain," Lamar replied. "But cultural change requires more than individual accountability. It requires systemic transformation." Bailey nodded soberly. "For what it's worth, sir, many of us are glad to have you at the helm of Liberty. The airline needed new leadership." As the Manhattan skyline appeared on the horizon, Flight 372 began its final approach to JFK International Airport. What had begun as Jasmine's exciting first solo trip had transformed into a watershed moment for Liberty Airlines, and perhaps for the industry as a whole. The plane touched down on the runway with a gentle thud, but for Bethany Caldwell, Lamar Washington, and young Jasmine, the real journey was just beginning. The distinctive ding of the seatbelt sign turning off released a flurry of activity throughout the cabin as Flight 372 finally reached its gate at JFK International Airport. Unlike the usual rush to retrieve overhead luggage, however, many passengers remained seated, their attention fixed on the unfolding drama in first class. Jasmine sat quietly beside her father, her posture straight but her eyes betraying fatigue from the emotional ordeal. Lamar's protective presence had restored some of her confidence, but the day's events had left their mark. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice over the intercom, "we have arrived at our gate at JFK International. Local time is 4:45 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 76 degrees. Before we deplane, I'd like to inform you that Liberty Airlines representatives will be available in the jet bridge for any passengers wishing to provide statements regarding today's incidents. We appreciate your patience and cooperation." Through the aircraft windows, the unusual welcoming committee was visible, not just the standard gate agents, but a team of professionally dressed individuals including the New York station manager and several corporate representatives who had been hastily dispatched from Liberty's Manhattan offices. More surprising was the cluster of journalists and camera crews positioned just beyond the secure area. News of the mid-air confrontation had spread rapidly through social media, with the hashtag Liberty Airlines racism now trending nationally. Patricia Chin approached Lamar's seat, her tablet in hand. "Mr. Washington, we have a developing situation. The videos some passengers took have gone viral. CNN, MSNBC, and several other networks are requesting statements." Lamar nodded, unsurprised. "Have our PR team issue the prepared statement about our commitment to investigating the incident thoroughly and implementing immediate changes. No specific comments about Ms. Caldwell yet." "And the board members?" Patricia asked quietly. "They're requesting an emergency virtual meeting in 30 minutes. Tell them I'll be available after I've ensured my daughter is safely with her aunt," Lamar replied firmly. "Family comes first, that's exactly the point they need to understand." In the rear of the aircraft, Bethany Caldwell remained seated in the jump seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Julia Roberts approached her with an expression of professional detachment. "Security will escort you through a private exit," Julia informed her. "You're to report to regional headquarters tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for a formal hearing. Your union representative has been notified." Bethany nodded numbly, the reality of her situation finally setting in. 15 years of service potentially erased by one day of poor judgment. She thought of her son, her mortgage, her entire life built around this career. "Julia," she began, her voice cracking, "I never meant to." "Save it for tomorrow," Julia cut her off, not unkindly. "This isn't just about you anymore." As passengers began to deplane, Dorothy Wilson gathered her belongings and turned to Jasmine. "Young lady, I want you to have this." She pressed a small, worn book into Jasmine's hands. "It's a first edition of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It helped me through some difficult times. Perhaps it will do the same for you." Jasmine accepted the gift with genuine surprise. "Ms. Wilson, I can't take your book. You absolutely can, Dorothy insisted with a warm smile. On one condition, that you come speak to the students at my community center in Harlem. They need to hear your story from someone their age. Lamar, overhearing the exchange, nodded appreciatively. She would be honored, Ms. Wilson. And so would I. Harold Preston approached next, handing Lamar his business card. Washington, what happened today was inexcusable. But your response was exemplary. I'd like to discuss potential investment opportunities in your diversity initiatives. My firm has been looking to support meaningful change in corporate America. Lamar accepted the card with a measured nod. Interesting how it takes a public incident for some opportunities to materialize. Harold acknowledged the pointed comment with a rueful smile. Sometimes it takes witnessing injustice firsthand to truly understand its impact. I'm not too proud to admit when I've been blind to certain realities. As the first-class cabin slowly emptied, Michael Jenkins made his way to Jasmine and Lamar. Mr. Washington, Miss Washington, it has been a privilege to serve you today despite the circumstances. I want you to know that many of us at Liberty are committed to doing better. Lamar shook Michael's hand firmly. I'd like you to call my office next week. I think your perspective would be valuable as we reshape our training protocols. Michael's eyes widened. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. In the terminal, the scene was barely controlled chaos. Liberty Airlines PR representatives were attempting to manage the media presence while passengers from the flight were already giving interviews, recounting what they had witnessed. Dorothy Wilson, despite her age, strode confidently toward a CNN reporter. Young man, I have something to say about what I saw today, and about what I've seen for the past 80 years in this country. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Lamar were escorted through a private airport entrance where Jasmine's aunt, Dr. Kimberly Washington, waited anxiously. The sisters embraced tightly as Lamar explained the situation. This was supposed to be her exciting first solo trip, Kimberly said sadly, hugging her niece. Instead, it became another lesson in being black in America. Maybe it can be both, Jasmine spoke up, surprising both adults. An exciting trip and a lesson. Dad's turning it into something important, right? Lamar felt a surge of pride at his daughter's resilience. That's right, princess. And you're going to help. Back at Liberty's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, the company's stock had dropped nearly 4% since the first videos hit social media. The board of directors, assembled in a virtual emergency meeting, appeared as a grid of concerned faces on the large conference room display. This is a PR nightmare, declared board member William Blackstone. We need immediate damage control. With all due respect, countered a younger board member, Sofia Rodriguez, this is much more than a PR issue. This is about systemic problems within our corporate culture. Mr. Washington was right to address it as such. The videos don't lie, added another member. Our liability here is clear. If the Washington family weren't the owners, we'd be looking at a major discrimination lawsuit. In New York, as Lamar prepared to join the virtual board meeting from his sister-in-law's Upper East Side apartment, his phone buzzed with an unexpected call. The caller ID showed the name Raymond Jones, the security consultant who had been discreetly watching over Jasmine. Raymond, report, Lamar answered. Sir, I observed the entire incident as instructed, Raymond stated professionally. I have extensive notes and was prepared to intervene if the situation escalated further. However, there's something else you should know. Go on. I've been tracking the social media response. This isn't an isolated incident with Ms. Caldwell. Former passengers are coming forward with similar experiences dating back years, many with Liberty but some from other airlines as well. This is becoming a much larger conversation about discrimination in air travel generally. Lamar absorbed this information thoughtfully. Thank you, Raymond. Send me your complete report. As evening fell over New York City, Jasmine sat in her aunt's guest room, scrolling through the flood of social media responses to her experience. Some comments were supportive, others questioned the story or minimized the discrimination. A few even suggested her father was overreacting or leveraging the situation for publicity. She set her phone aside, picking up Dorothy Wilson's gift instead. Opening the book to its first page, she began to read Maya Angelou's powerful words about dignity in the face of prejudice. For the first time since the ordeal began, Jasmine felt a sense of perspective. Her experience, painful as it was, had become part of a much larger, ongoing conversation about race, power, and accountability in America. In a midtown Manhattan hotel room, Bethany Caldwell sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone as messages from colleagues poured in. Some offered support, others distanced themselves. Her union representative had called 3 times, outlining the potential defenses for tomorrow's hearing. But as Bethany watched a clip of Lamar Washington's speech on the aircraft, something shifted inside her. For the first time, she truly saw herself through others' eyes, not as the professional she believed herself to be, but as someone whose biases had caused real harm. She picked up her phone and, ignoring her representative's advice to say nothing, began typing an email to Liberty Airlines HR, with copies to Lamar Washington and Jasmine Washington. The subject line read simply, an acknowledgement and apology. As midnight approached, the incident aboard Flight 372 had become the leading story on multiple news networks. Commentators debated the broader implications for corporate America, while social media erupted with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination in various settings. What had begun as one teenager's humiliating experience had catalyzed a national conversation about who belongs in premium spaces, and who gets to decide. For Liberty Airlines, the true test would not be in their immediate response, but in the lasting changes that would follow. The story was far from over. 6 months after Flight 372, Jasmine Washington stood backstage at Liberty Airlines headquarters auditorium in Atlanta, adjusting her blazer nervously. At 16, she was about to address the company's entire executive team and board of directors at the official launch of the Passenger Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program born from her experience. "You ready, Princess?" Lamar asked, his pride evident as he straightened her collar. "I think so," Jasmine replied, glancing down at her notes one last time. "I just hope it makes a difference." "It already has," her father assured her. "Look around you." The transformation of Liberty Airlines over the past 6 months had been remarkable. Following the incident, Lamar had seized the moment to implement sweeping changes that extended far beyond a typical corporate response to bad publicity. The company had completely overhauled its hiring and promotion practices, resulting in the most diverse executive leadership team in the airline industry. Anti-bias training was now mandatory for all employees, conducted in small groups with real-world scenarios rather than perfunctory online modules. Most significantly, Liberty had established an independent passenger advocacy board with actual authority to investigate complaints and recommend binding actions. As Jasmine peered through the curtain at the assembled audience, she spotted Michael Jenkins in the front row. As promised, Lamar had brought him onto the team developing the new initiative, eventually promoting him to Director of Customer Experience. His first-hand knowledge of both the frontline employee perspective and the passenger experience had proven invaluable. Dorothy Wilson sat beside Michael, her presence a testament to the friendship that had developed between her and the Washington family. True to her word, Jasmine had spoken at Dorothy's Community Center in Harlem, an experience that had helped her process her own trauma while connecting it to the broader historical context of racial discrimination in America. Notably absent was Bethany Caldwell. The aftermath of Flight 372 had followed a different path than many expected. While social media had immediately called for her termination, Lamar had ultimately taken a more nuanced approach. The morning after the incident, Bethany had arrived at her hearing with an unexpected proposal. Rather than defending her actions, she had acknowledged her biases and requested the opportunity to be part of the solution. Instead of immediate termination, she had been placed on 6 months unpaid leave with a requirement to complete extensive education on the history of racial discrimination in transportation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator announced, "please welcome Jasmine Washington." Taking a deep breath, Jasmine walked onto the stage to warm applause. The audience included not just Liberty employees but representatives from other airlines, transportation companies, and civil rights organizations. What had begun as a corporate crisis had evolved into an industry-wide initiative. 6 months ago, Jasmine began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I boarded a Liberty Airlines flight excited for my first solo trip. Instead, I received a painful lesson in how it feels when someone decides you don't belong somewhere based solely on your appearance. She paused, making eye contact with various audience members. That day was difficult, but what followed has been transformative. Not just for me, but for this company and hopefully for the industry. Today, I'm proud to help launch the Jasmine Washington Passenger Dignity Initiative. The screen behind her illuminated with the initiative's logo and mission statement, ensuring that every passenger travels with dignity, respect, and belonging, no exceptions. This program isn't about punishing individual employees for biases we all may carry, Jasmine continued. It's about creating systems that help us recognize those biases before they harm others. It's about accountability, education, and growth. As she outlined the program's components, Jasmine noticed a late arrival slipping into the back row, Bethany Caldwell, looking nervous but determined. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Jasmine gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Following the incident, Bethany had sent a heartfelt written apology to Jasmine. After much consideration, Jasmine had agreed to meet with her former flight attendant in a mediated session. That difficult conversation had been painful for both but ultimately healing, particularly when Bethany acknowledged how her financial struggles and personal resentments had manifested as racial bias. The true measure of this initiative won't be in corporate statements or policy documents, Jasmine concluded. It will be in the everyday experiences of passengers who never have to feel what I felt that day. It will be in the culture we create together, one where belonging isn't determined by the color of your skin or the cost of your ticket, but by our shared humanity and dignity. The audience rose in a standing ovation as Lamar joined his daughter on stage, followed by Harold Preston, who had made good on his promise to invest in the initiative. Through his venture capital firm, Preston had established a $50 million fund for minority entrepreneurs in the transportation sector. I'd like to thank everyone who helped make this possible, Lamar addressed the crowd once the applause subsided. Particularly those passengers on Flight 372 who spoke up when they witnessed injustice. As Dr. King reminded us, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. He gestured toward Dorothy Wilson, who acknowledged the reference with a knowing smile. I'd also like to recognize those who had the courage to acknowledge mistakes and commit to growth, Lamar continued, subtly nodding toward Bethany in the back row. True change requires both accountability and forgiveness. As the formal presentation concluded and the networking reception began, Jasmine found herself surrounded by airline executives eager to implement similar programs at their companies. What had started as discrimination against one teenager had catalyzed an industry-wide reckoning. Across the room, Michael Jenkins approached Bethany Caldwell, who stood alone by the refreshment table. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone neutral. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. "But it felt important to witness this. To see something positive grow from my mistake." "And what's next for you?" Michael asked. Bethany smiled sadly. "My suspension ends next week. I've been offered a position in the training department, helping develop scenarios for the anti-bias curriculum based on what I did wrong. Using my experience to help others do better." "That takes courage," Michael acknowledged. "Not everyone would choose that path." Meanwhile, Dorothy Wilson had cornered Harold Preston with the intensity only an octogenarian former teacher could muster. "Young man," she said, though Preston was well into his 60s, "your investment fund is a good start, but what about educational opportunities? These companies need diverse leadership pipelines that begin long before executive recruitment." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "You know, my foundation has been looking for new educational initiatives to support. Perhaps we should talk." As the event wound down, Jasmine found a quiet moment with her father. "Dad, do you think anything has really changed?" she asked, suddenly doubtful despite the day's apparent success. "Or is this just corporate window dressing?" Lamar considered the question seriously. "Real change is never finished, Princess. It's a continuous process. What matters is that we've created systems of accountability and education that didn't exist before. We've opened doors that were previously closed." He gestured around the room, where Liberty's newly diverse leadership team was engaged in animated conversations with industry partners. 6 months ago, most airline executives wouldn't have attended an event focused on racial bias in passenger treatment. Today, they're competing to demonstrate their commitment. That's progress, even if it's imperfect. Jasmine nodded, understanding the nuance in her father's response. "I guess the work continues." "Always," Lamar agreed. "But so does the progress." As they prepared to leave, Bethany approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Washington, Miss Washington, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this initiative. I know my words can never fully repair the harm I caused, but I want you to know that I'm committed to this work for the long term." Jasmine studied the woman who had once made her feel so small. The transformation in Bethany was evident. Not just in her words but in her demeanor, which lacked the defensive pride that had characterized their first encounter. "We all have work to do, Ms. Caldwell," Jasmine replied with a maturity beyond her years. "The important thing is that we're doing it together." As the Washington family departed the event, reporters clustered outside, eager for comments on the initiative's launch. Jasmine, once hesitant to speak publicly about her experience, now stepped forward confidently. "What would you say to other young people who face discrimination?" asked one journalist. Jasmine considered the question carefully before answering. "I would tell them that their dignity isn't determined by how others treat them. I would tell them that speaking up can be scary but staying silent allows injustice to continue. And I would tell them that sometimes, painful moments can become powerful movements, if we have the courage to transform them." The wisdom in her response belied her 16 years, reflecting the profound personal growth that had emerged from her ordeal. As cameras flashed around them, Lamar placed a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders, not because she needed shielding anymore, but because he couldn't contain his pride in the young woman she had become. 6 months after being deemed unworthy of a first-class seat, Jasmine Washington had helped transform not just an airline, but an industry's approach to dignity and belonging. The journey had been painful, but the destination proved worth every difficult step along the way. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like what happened to Jasmine? Would you speak up or stay silent? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more incredible true stories of courage and justice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice has power. Use it to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Until next time. This story powerfully illustrates how prejudice can exist even in supposedly premium spaces. It shows that wealth and status don't shield people of color from discrimination, but they can provide tools to create meaningful change. Jasmine's experience demonstrates the importance of speaking up when witnessing injustice, as silence only perpetuates harmful systems. The Washington family's approach to resolution is particularly noteworthy. Rather than seeking simple retribution, they chose transformation, creating systems of accountability, education, and growth. This reminds us that true progress requires both justice and compassion. Dorothy Wilson's character teaches us about intergenerational wisdom and the ongoing struggle for equality. Harold Preston shows that witnessing discrimination firsthand can transform even the most privileged perspectives. And Bethany's journey illustrates how confronting our biases, while painful, leads to personal growth and healing. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals how individual incidents of discrimination are connected to broader systemic issues. By addressing root causes rather than symptoms, Liberty Airlines created change that extended beyond one flight attendant or one airline. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like what happened to Jasmine? Would you speak up or stay silent? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more incredible true stories of courage and justice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice has power. Use it to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Until next time.